The following story is based on clues that have been placed within all 4 Five Nights at Freddy's video games. Every big and little key detail had been taken into account, compiled, looked over with a fine-tooth comb to come up with the story you are about to hear. Please keep in mind that this is merely a speculation based on the deductions of a Five Nights at Freddy's fan. Some of the details within may not coincide with the opinions or theories of others, and some of it may. With this in mind, I would like to present my own theory in full of how this horrific story of Five Nights at Freddy's began, how it came to exist, how it evolved, and what became of a killer going by the name of Purple Guy. This is that story. In 1983, a restaurant called Fredbear's Family Diner was born. This was a restaurant that would cater to and entertain children of all ages while serving food and beverages in an environment where fantasy and fun come together. This location came equipped with 2 animatronic characters as their mascot, a golden-colored bear named Fredbear, and his gold bunny sidekick, Spring Bonnie. The restaurant launched, and children grew to love Fredbear's Family Diner and the characters that promoted the establishment. Children would bug parents to celebrate their birthday here, and the staff would provide the most fun a kid could ever have on his or her birthday. But it wasn't all smiles and laughter at Fredbear's Family Diner, for it was also the starting location that turned a well-respected employee into a vicious child killer. His name is not disclosed, but we know him best as Purple Guy, aptly named for his uniform. Sometime after the opening of this restaurant, a tragic accident occurred, and it was reported that a child lost his life at his own birthday party when he was pushed into the mouth of an animatronic character by bullies, which ended his life immediately. The event was viewed as a bad accident, but to the eyes of the Purple Guy, it was only just the beginning. It was also then that Fredbear's Family Diner's reputation started to plummet because of one of their animatronics killed a kid during his birthday party, thus developing a bad reputation, and eventually had to close their doors. On that day, 2 employees were working that shift, Purple Guy and a man dressed up as Fredbear. There was a 3rd employee that was being helped into a Spring Bonnie suit, but he's oblivious to this story. So we'll focus on the 2 main people of concern, Purple Guy and the man in the Fredbear suit. The bitten child was forced into the animatronic mouth of a performing animatronic Fredbear by 4 bullies, and only 2 animatronics are seen on the stage, Fredbear and Spring Bonnie. These would be the 2 original characters of Fredbear's Family Diner. These 2 original animatronic suits doubled as mascot suits for employees to wear. The endoskeletons within these suits were to be retracted by a crank mechanism inside the suit and locked into place by spring locks, enabling the wearer to carefully maneuver as the mascot character. Extreme safety precautions were made to not let any moisture or moist breath come into contact with these spring locks, since they would be prone to disengaging and causing an accident. A few days later, employees were instructed to not use Spring Bonnie or Fredbear at all, as it has posed too many unsafe risks, and that the animatronics were to be retired. Spring Bonnie is aptly named for the plush toy version being equipped with a finger trap, thus having the nickname Plush Trap. The other 4 characters, Freddy, Chica, Bonnie, and Foxy, haven't been created as characters yet. We never see them in the restaurant, and they never wander around in animatronic form, but are only seen as masks of the heads of the bullies, or in plush form being held by children. However, these characters have not existed in 1983. Now, if these characters don't exist until Freddy Fazbear's Pizza is formed later on, then why do these toys exist before then? How do these children get them? The answer can only mean that somebody who knew about the characters in the future, somebody from 1987, someone who knew about the tragedy of 1983, had to have had a vicious flashback to this time when the first child got killed taking these newer characters from '87 with him back to the horrid past of 1983, and his subconscious replayed the experience of being tormented by these 4 new animatronics, which would remain in his own subconscious, along with the horror of being present to witness the biting and killing of a saddened birthday child from 1983 for the rest of his life. Within the subconscious view of the horrid past, this child appeared to have a brother, a tough-looking kid that loved Foxy, hence why he always wears the mask of his favorite animatronic character. But why do these kids show admiration for characters that haven't been created yet? The answer? They didn't. The real kids appeared only as faceless to the witness, but only one key detail remained. The one that did the killing loved Foxy, hence why the perpetrator who killed the first child stood out resembling the character that associated with its killer, Foxy. To look into this horrid past and how the first original child really died, the only 2 witnesses to this accident other than the bullies themselves are Purple Guy and the man inside the Fredbear suit, who seemed to try to watch over this crying child and try to steer him right. As for the killer bully kid, he's been identified as the crying kid's brother. He also existed in the same home the subconscious nightmare occurs, and the sound of a man's telephoned voice echoes through the hall. Thus explaining that the future victim of 1987 is now inside the killer's house. His older kid is wearing a Foxy mask to further torment the subconscious mind with this gruesome past. So if the bully kid is the crying kid's brother, and the killer that lives in that house as well, that would mean that all 3 people are related to one another. We also see that the killer and the victim of 1987 worked at the original Fredbear's Family Diner together, which is obvious because how can you bring the past and the present together if you have not endured it? The man in the Fredbear suit would later work at Fazbear's Pizza in 1987 and becoming the bite victim. But we're getting too far ahead of the story. From his subconscious replay of the tragic event, we discover that the killer lived nearby the diner in a house, had a mean kid, a wimpy kid, and witnessed the killing of his youngest child. The identity of the man in the Fredbear suit has not yet been revealed, but we do realize he had to have known about this event and everything that went with it in order to be terrorized in his nightmares. This event would remain with the man in the Fredbear suit for the rest of his life since he witnessed the first killing, but was unable to stop it since the animatronic body was in automatic mode, performing on the stage at the time it happened, and not being worn by him during that time. This spark of murder would also grow within the killer until later on when he would kill again. And since 1983, the restaurant started losing business and eventually closed down due to this incident. Later, an unknown restaurateur opens up 2 new restaurants in succession with a new name, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, in hopes to resurrect the original diner from the ashes of the previous one and used as a premise to continue a certain killer's murderous streak as revenge for the death of his youngest child. This restaurant chain would also hire 2 old employees from the diner to work at the new location. One of them we know as being Purple Guy, since he would know more about the animatronics than anyone else. The other employee will wind up to become the bite victim, since he is the only other adult that witnessed such a tragic event and knows everything about what happened. His identity will soon be revealed. But for now, let's concentrate on Purple Guy and how this story came to happen. Now, perhaps it's safe to say that the former employee of Fredbear's Family Diner went on to open Freddy Fazbear's Pizza to serve out his revenge, but he was actually brought over as a manager by the restaurant owner. The person who owns the restaurant is not Purple Guy. We never know who it is, but it's definitely not Purple Guy. Now, this restaurant would feature all new characters, although the 2 original characters would be retired and stored at this location, which will give our antagonist a disguise to use to lure children. The sister location of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza would also be open later on, and we'll refer to that location later on as location number 2. But let's learn why location number 1 had to be closed down. In location number 1, we feature the new characters Freddy Fazbear, Bonnie Bunny, Chica the Chicken, and Foxy the Pirate. These locations also have a safe room, which is a secret room that is not monitored by cameras nor programmed into the animatronic's memory. It was to be a room designed to be a safe haven away from any potential dangers should there ever be any. the employees were told about it via pre-recorded taped instructional cassettes, but also told not to go inside, not to mention it to anyone else, and not to use it as a break room or a place to congregate. Within this safe room, the original Fredbear and Spring Bonnie suits were also stored. Now, why keep this room a total secret? The answer will soon unfold, as we learn that around this time, several children have been killed by a man dressed up as one of the characters, who would lure his young victims into the back of this safe room and kill them. The killer didn't want the safe room to be known by anyone else but him, even though the employees also knew about its existence, but they were sworn under complete secrecy and told not to go inside unless it was a dire emergency only. The reason for this is to give the killer an uninterrupted room to work and a place to store his implements of murder, namely, his costume. A costume that nobody would ever report as missing. A costume he could slip in and out of with ease. A costume which animatronics you can retract by spring mechanisms. A report of 5 total missing children were made, but the bodies of the murdered children were never found. The killer used one of the old suits from the original location, since it was the only one of the 2 animatronic suits that doubled as mascots for employees to wear. He used this suit to lure the children into the safe room, killed them, and stuffed their bodies of the children into the new animatronic suits. The kids the killer murdered did not seem to be the same ones that murdered his own kid, since the bully kids were strong-looking, tough, mean. These ones were weaker, smaller. Perhaps the killer saw something in these kids that made him remember the same types of kids that may have killed his youngest son. But why 5 random children? Perhaps they too were bullies in some way to their brothers and sisters, and the killer wanted to teach them a lesson that would later result in their deaths. The count of murdered children that he would kill would wind up being the same amount as the ones that were involved in the killing of his child before he felt he could stop his murdersome streak. 4 bullies, 1 dead kid, 5 children total. Somehow the number 5 weighed on his mind way too much. In total, 5 children were involved in the 1983 killings, 1 dead, 4 perpetrators. The amount of bodies would also have to match the amount of animatronics at his disposal as a way to hide them away from law enforcement should he ever get caught. And there are 5 suits that he can use, other than the 6th suit, the killer's murder disguise. Children 1 through 4 were all killed and stuffed into the animatronic suits of Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy, respectively. Child number 5 would have to be stuffed inside one of the extra suits. By this time, we have 6 dead children, the first one from 1983, and the 5 new murders. Since we know the other 2 characters from the diner are also present in this safe room, yet retired, one of those suits had to serve as the hiding place for the 5th child, either Fredbear or Spring Bonnie. The killer decided on Fredbear to stuff him into, and the clue was during the 5 Nights at Freddy's 2 minigame Give Gifts, Give Life, where after the puppet gave life to the 4 original characters, the 5th child would appear from out of nowhere, and Fredbear's empty head performed the jump scare from the same location as the 5th child. Since these 2 suits came with a locking mechanism that disengaged the endoskeleton when exposed to moisture, the killer removed the endoskeleton completely from Fredbear's animatronic so that he can hide the body of the 5th child inside it without the endoskeleton coming loose and injuring him in the process due to the blood, and prevent further bleeding from being crushed. The endoskeleton would then be stored as spare parts in the employee room, and that leaves only one other suit for the killer to wear so that he can lure the children, Spring Bonnie. Although the bodies of the children were starting to decompose inside the suits and wither away, the spirits of the murdered children would never leave. And with the business still in full swing, the animatronics would all perform their duties they were all programmed to do, especially the killer's favorite animatronic, Foxy, where he would be found stationed nearby Pirate's Cove quite often. Only now the animatronics slowly became more aggressive and seemed to have sort of hatred for anyone in a security guard uniform. Since the one that murdered them was actually a security guard, namely Purple Guy, they would gravitate to the office and immediately go after the security guard, which is why all of the children and guests of the restaurant were safe. They were only looking for security guards. Over time, the animatronics started to produce a foul odor. Blood and mucus were clearly evident around their mouths. Parents began to complain about these issues, and one parent even reported that the animatronics as being reanimated carcasses. Around this time, the killer knows that the jig is almost up for him, since the parents started to complain about what they saw, yet he wanted to ensure the evidence was well hidden. and it was announced that the safe room was to be sealed off, entrapping anything else inside, which also includes anyone else's personal effects if they got left within. Since the killer knows so much about this room, wants it to be a total secret, and also seems to want to seal it away, would easily deduce that he's trying to hide something. Not worried that the animatronics were hiding the remains of the children's bodies within, his main concern was hiding the method he used away from prying eyes on the outside, namely law enforcement or other employees that might report him. Therefore, the original animatronics Fredbear and Spring Bonnie would both be sealed within the safe room by an artificial wall, one that the killer could still easily slip in and out of to continue his murderous streak without anyone else noticing. With the murder tactic sealed behind an artificial wall and the animatronics still in full operation, the killer now feels a little more confident that he will be able to get away with it after any investigations by law enforcement would commence, assuming the parents of the children grew wiser, that is, which would then put any other security guards at risk of being a suspect, since they would be around the animatronics the most during their day shifts and would contract the odor from within the animatronics. Although the killer was never apprehended, this reputation would immediately hurt the business nonetheless, so it was forced to shut down. However, the building remained and left to rot. Now, why didn't anyone come along to tear this building down or opening something else in its place? It stood there and rotted. Perhaps the killer had purchased this old building right after it closed down, so that he would ensure that his murder location would always be standing. But that's just a theory. Now, shortly after the closing of this building, location number 2 opens in 1987. This location was announced to be the new and improved Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, featuring all-new kid-friendly animatronics built with new face recognition technology to help go after registered predators to protect the children so that any further killings at these locations would never happen again. This has led to believe that perhaps the owner of the restaurant is not Purple Guy, but somebody who was well aware of the fact that the killings have happened at a Freddy Fazbear's Pizza location and wanted to prevent it from happening again. Therefore, inducting new characters, ones that are more kid-friendly, and ones that could apprehend a killer before it struck. And all of this had to have been greenlit by the owner of the second location, since he wanted to prevent any killings at his establishment without realizing that the killer is the one person he never would have suspected to be, for the killer is now operating at location number 2. Nobody knows how long this second location stayed in business, but in the concerns of the missing children having something to do with the first Freddy Fazbear's Pizza were still a major concern for law enforcement. Now, this new location would also serve as a spare parts graveyard for the 4 older animatronics from the old sister location, the one that closed down and left to rot. These animatronics still had the spirits of the murdered children within them, but they also had that foul odor as well, because it has been speculated that a serviceman tried to add the new technology into the old suits, but didn't complete the job because of the odor, and had to stop immediately. So now we discovered that the location not only had the 4 new kid-friendly versions, but was also a storage for the classic animatronics. And locked away in a sealed safe room for the original locations, Fredbear and Spring Bonnie still sit as the building rots. So looking at the ratio, we know that we have 6 dead children. 5 of them end up crammed into animatronic suits. The 6th one laid to rest after his death at the diner in 1983. But what the killer didn't take into account is that the 6th child's soul is also tormented, wandering free, watching the other dead children's souls roam freely as each respected character, like a sad outsider, one that is looking from the outside and feeling sorrow for his killed brethren. This soul eventually found his way into the only new character that fit his personality perfectly, a puppet with a face forever frozen in tears, the same way he died in 1983. Using this puppet body, he is now able to possess it and use it to torment the killer, giving him a huge dislike. Being that he was the very first victim of the murders, he carried with him the sadness and sorrow for the 5 other children with him, and would conspire with the other animatronics to go after the killer, the man in the security uniform. With all of the classic animatronics working together, they all seem to gravitate to the security office to torment the one inside in hopes to drive the killer away. The killer, now realizing these animatronics are behaving unnaturally, he makes his presence less and less known, to the point where he would pre-record his instructions to any of his new employees, namely the security guards he would hire for specific reasons of taking the blame for the murders, because law enforcement is still at large to investigate his streak, and would eventually apprehend him. hence why he always does his work remotely from an isolated location, the original rotting building. Even though the remains of the children may not be as evident as they were before, eventually this would lead to a full investigation where the current-day security guard was apprehended, just as the killer had planned. The killer seemed to know a lot about the various incidents and would speak very nervous about some of the features of the animatronics. In his haste, he admits on the recordings that he doesn't like the puppet for constantly thinking. However, he did like Foxy for some reason. After all, he was his favorite. The only other employee to know about his favorite animatronic being Foxy, and a dislike for the puppet, would be none other than Jeremy Fitzgerald, the night security guard in his new shift, working with new technologies and working with the new characters, as well as the old ones. It's also mentioned to Jeremy that the day security guard used to be the night shift guard, but started noticing strange activity from the animatronic characters and requested to go on day shift. And it was then where this particular night guard was arrested, thus later giving Jeremy the opportunity to switch from night shift to day shift later. But while he's working the night shift, Jeremy started noticing very strange movements within the animatronic characters as well. The 4 new ones with face and recognition technology, the 4 being possessed by the 4 dead children, the puppet being possessed by the first murder victim, Balloon Boy, whose job is to disengage any lights that would scare off the other animatronics as a pre-programmed tactic to use against a potential predator for the other animatronics to later attack, and Mangle, who was supposed to be the toy version of the classic Foxy character but was mishandled too much by the children, so it became a build-yourself attraction for the children to take apart and put back together again. Mangle, programmed with the same technology as Balloon Boy, would help the other animatronics to apprehend any potential predators by disengaging their light sources so the apprehension can occur. The classic animatronics from the first Freddy Fazbear's Pizza restaurant were also considered to be used as well. But alongside the new toy, kid-friendly animatronics in service, the old animatronics from location number 1 also began moving around the restaurant right alongside the new technology animatronics. So we know now that the second location has employed the killer, an unnamed day guard who got arrested for a crime he didn't commit, and Jeremy Fitzgerald to take care of the night shift security. The day shift guard's identity is undisclosed, as he is mentioned to Jeremy simply as being the other guard that worked before him. This guard moved to the day shift because he felt uncomfortable being in the restaurant overrun by animatronics that just won't sit still, and yet they seem to want to gravitate to the office for some reason. The reason for this is because the new animatronics are also programmed to always be where the people are, but at night the only people that are found is in the office. Now, was this really a reason, or was he really trying to cover up the fact that the animatronics automatically go after security guards to exact revenge for killing the 5 children? As we remember, and what is unbeknownst to anyone else, is that the classic characters all have a vengeance against the security guards, because one of them caused their deaths. After working 5 nights at his new job, Jeremy learns that there is a tragic incident that required complete investigations, which started on his 4th night. A full-blown investigation from the prior incident, and his 5th night, the building being placed on lockdown when the incident escalated, and his 6th night, the restaurant being closed down as someone who used one of the suits messed with the other animatronics that rendered them not to work properly, which eventually causes the restaurant to be closed down permanently at year's end. On Jeremy's 5th night, we realized that the date on the check is dated Thursday, November 12th, 1987. We are now able to figure out that Jeremy's first night was Sunday, November 8th. By night 6th, Jeremy learns that a position was suddenly available and he is able to work a lesser dangerous day shift. At the same time, Jeremy's instructions came with details about the investigation and the person on the phone trying to play it off as nothing to worry about, it's all routine, it should clear up soon, but that the day position suddenly became available for some reason, and we can only deduce that the day guard was accused of the murders and was arrested for a crime he didn't commit. Well, we get the idea that perhaps this man on the phone knows a little too much, but still doesn't want to let on that he knows anything. He also seems confident and adamant to getting Jeremy onto the day shift to cover a birthday party the next day, but also seems sort of concerned with keeping Jeremy safe, hence why he tried to leave him a memo about the place on lockdown before he showed up to work. But Jeremy never received it. The idea of him sneaking back outside to go home would have to rile up the animatronics, so he gave them the instruction to just finish out his shift normally, so as to not be attacked. And he is told specifically to wear his uniform the next day. By night 7, a new security guard named Fritz Smith is hired on to take Jeremy's place at the night shift, but is quickly fired due to tampering with the animatronics and odor on his very first night. We can deduce that the odor came from the classic animatronics that somehow got on him during his shift while trying to tamper with the animatronics, resulting in changing the AI of their movement about the restaurant and causing them to go haywire. Well, we did hear that the animatronics didn't work right after a yellow suit was being used, and that none of the other animatronics were working right. But who else would know about any yellow suits other than the 2 employees that worked at the original Fredbear's family diner, that being Purple Guy and the guy in the Fredbear suit? But how did the phone guy know that the other guy on the other line, Jeremy Fitzgerald, would know automatically what he was talking about when he mentioned the yellow suit? Well, it couldn't have been Chica. She was present the entire time. The only other yellow suit could have only come from the original location from 1983, and only Jeremy Fitzgerald would know that information. Mainly because he was working alongside Purple Guy in 1983, and the next day would become the victim of the bite of 1987. Now we can now assume that these 2 employees are now working together again as the killer and Jeremy Fitzgerald, the only other one that would know anything about the past event. The date, now Saturday, November 14th. And it was the day that was marked as the bite of 1987, which happened during a child's birthday party. This would be the second bite in the history of the story. However, this time, it didn't kill the victim, but rather destroyed his frontal lobe and sent the victim into a comatose state, where he would be reminded of all the terrors he's seen at the employee of the company, past and present. Yes, we learned that the victim had many connections with the killer in order to bring the past and present together within his subconscious mind. A subconscious that would replay that nightmare again and again for the rest of his life. Everything he remembered would remain in this nightmare. Details such as how the killer never liked the puppet, details about how he favored Foxy would also go with him to his nightmares. For the bully that pushed the child into Fredbear's mouth wore a Foxy head, symbolizing forever as the connection between Foxy, the bully who killed the first child, and the killer himself. He seemed to want to associate the killer bully with Foxy, just as the killer said he favored. The bite victim now feels as if he's being reminded of the sad child's murder because the same thing happened to him in 1987. Being without his frontal lobe, he becomes hospitalized on life support, which is why appearances of an IV bag, flowers, and a bottle of pills sometimes appeared next to the bed where Freddy would be hiding. He somehow knows that he's still alive and hospitaled, only this time he shares the same horrors as that of the very first bite victim of 1983, mixing his own memories into the child's, which explains why he's able to see Freddy, Bonnie, Foxy, and Chica, characters that have not been created yet, but somehow made their way back to the past in a vicious flashback as a result of his ever-living nightmares that would replay in his mind for the rest of his life. So now we know that Jeremy Fitzgerald is not only just the bite victim of 1987, not just the person who worked alongside Purple Guy in the diner in 1983, but also has recurring nightmares of the animatronics in scarier forms. Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, Freddy, the Cupcake, Plush Trap, remembering all of the animatronics in nightmare form, toy form, and mask form, as symbolized by the bodies that were stuffed within each respected suit, and somehow are also on the heads of the bullies who killed the first child. Now, there's a way all of this links together, but it all happens to be the imagination of the one who witnessed it all, and why he was picked out as the bite victim of 1987. The Purple Guy knew that Jeremy Fitzgerald knew too much about the past and the present, and something had to have been done. But he didn't want to kill him because they had a good friendship way back in 1983. So instead of killing him, he thought putting him out of commission during the time of the investigations would be in order, because this was around the time when the restaurant was being threatened of a lockdown. The only other person that would know any information, Jeremy Fitzgerald. Hence why the killer only staged the bite of 87 and not a full-on killing. Perhaps he felt a little sympathetic about his friend and didn't want to kill him off, but just wanted him out of commission for a while. It ended up going a little farther than planned, for the animatronic that ended up biting him took away his frontal lobe forever. He was put out of commission, all right, but he's no longer the same. And the only one that could deduce Purple Guy's actions, Jeremy Fitzgerald, now lies in a hospital feeling like a kid again at Fredbear's Family Diner. Jeremy Fitzgerald, in his subconscious mind, now plays out the role of the child, scared, tortured, tormented, and driven by his nightmares. But what about seeing himself inside the Fredbear suit? Perhaps this is now his new reality, and that he knows exactly what's going to happen to the crying child, and therefore tries to protect him, watching over him, guiding him right. And because of this, it would be within the same ambition for Jeremy to approach this child in his nightmares to apologize for the child's demise and inabilities to stop it from happening, especially after bearing witness to it so many years ago. So now you see that the killer is definitely Purple Guy, who was at the employ of the original diner in 1983, got hired on to work in the new Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, and the second location because he knew so much about the operations of the animatronics and was also very well admired by many employees, very trusted by the owner, and did his job perfectly, and would somehow stage the bite of 1987 because the animatronic still didn't work right. So, how did the bite of 1987 become perpetrated by the killer? It's simple. The message that he shared with Jeremy the night before when he said, "None of the animatronics are working right." It means that he tampered with the animatronics. He was the one who tried to remove the face recognition and tried to remove them in the classic characters as well, thus causing all animatronics to run haywire, and for two purposes. One, as to not being caught by the animatronics as being a predator, but two, to administer the bite of 1987 and to put Jeremy Fitzgerald out of commission for the information he knew too much about that would convict the killer, his close friend, the guy that worked alongside him in the original Fredbear's Family Diner in 1983. Now, having been working around all of these tragedies, he still escaped scot-free, no pun intended. How can he move along undetected by surveillance cameras, the animatronics, the owner of the store, law enforcement? The answer? The Purple Guy is very crafty. He knows more about the animatronics than anyone else. He was the one who tampered with the animatronics so that they would not catch him as being a potential predator who killed the original kids. And then he would later on know exactly which yellow suit was missing, and as we all knew, Chica was always there. But one particular yellow suit was not. Golden Freddy. Since he was always with Spring Bonnie, that means that Golden Freddy would get up and walk around, or even teleport. Because remember, Golden Freddy was still possessed by the fifth dead child. So let's just say that Golden Freddy just kind of eased his way into the picture and then eased his way back out, undetected. Nobody really used the Golden Freddy suit, but in the eyes of the Purple Guy, somebody did. And he got frantic, because he got paranoid that he thought that somebody knew about his secret location behind the walls of the safe room, and he panicked. Eventually, the killer would go on to reach a high seniority of the company that he became the manager of any and all security guards, who can hire and fire them for any reason he deemed, or in the case of the day security guard that suddenly disappeared, have them arrested for a crime they didn't commit in order to get them off scot-free. Again, no pun intended, Scott. Combined with the voice messages we heard, his nervousness spoken during the certain subjects in question, the aftermath of the 5 later missing children, and their fates, where does it all go from here? The killer is now able to operate normally, but since the investigations have come to an end at location number 2, resulting in a lockdown of their business and later on close down at year's end, he would return a couple of years later at location number 3, placing the timeline in 1993. It was 6 years since the killings, 6 years since the investigations, and 6 years since the bite of 1987 rendered a longtime employee out of commission. Anybody who knew anything about the killer are now out of the picture. A whole new Freddy Fazbear's Pizza location is now in full swing, and the killer is still at large. Since he had not killed since 1987, he still remembered that location number 1 was still standing, and by this time the building was in such disrepair, holes appeared in the roof to let in the water of the rain, the place starting to get overrun by mice, and the only other relic in the form of a yellow Spring Bonnie suit he used to lure the children into the demises, sealed away into the safe room away from prying eyes. The classic animatronics of Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy, along with the still-stripped Fredbear suit, were all that were salvaged from the lockdown of the second location. The spring Bonnie suit still remained at the rotted location of the first Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, since that was still considered valuable evidence that would still be able to convict the killer if anyone knew about it. So he made sure Spring Bonnie always had a home within that sealed-off safe room within location number 1. The first night security guard to be employed at this new location is an unsuspecting man named Mike Schmidt. He knew nothing about the previous murders, knew even less about Fredbear's Family Diner in 1983. For all he knew, this was a place to work for rate of pay. Nothing more, nothing less. He didn't know too much, he didn't want to know too much. The killer, still at the employee of the company, continues to give his new guard his instructions via telephone, still using pre-recorded messages to get through to him. Only this time, he is very careful in what he says to prevent the newcomer to know anything about what happened in the years prior. All Mike Schmidt ever knew was the bite of 1987, and that's all that would be ever mentioned. As the nights drew on, the killer knows that while he is able to proceed without conviction of law enforcement, what he wants more than anything else is to end his own nightmares, that he continues living time and time again. From what we can deduce from this new set of messages to Mike, the man on the phone does mention that he did work in the office before him, which is exactly what he said he would do when he spoke to Jeremy in location number 2 toward the last nights of his shift when the restaurant reopened. He would work the night shift, and that's exactly what he did, work the night shift. Until he realized that the animatronics were still after him because the souls of the children were still inside, looking to exact revenge, and coming after the killer in ways that he would recognize as being repeated again and again and again, driving him to the point where he no longer wants to be a part of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, no longer wants to be a part of the company. In his haste, he hires Mike Schmidt so that he can do the rest of his work remotely, and has made a solemn vow that this would be his last week. The killer had started to see all that restored classic animatronics that carried over to the third and final location of the story started going after him in a way where he felt uncomfortable to be there at night, as if he was being tormented and tortured by the souls of the children that he had eliminated. And the other security guards that he had put out of commission before him were finally able to hone in on the killer himself. Realizing this being a strong possibility, the voice messages to any new night guards were still pre-recorded, but transmitted remotely away from the restaurant. He knew he had enough, and he informed Mike that this was to be his last week of employment, and he has given clues as to why that is. Supernatural occurrences continue to surface as newspaper clippings of the 5 murders keep appearing in places of posters on the wall, which is only viewed by the surveillance cameras, as to give hints as to why the animatronics are behaving the way they are. Unable to wait that long, the killer decided that enough was enough, and he wanted nothing further to do with the restaurant or its responsibilities. Moreover, he didn't want anything to do with the souls that continue tormenting him. In Mike's 4th night, he stated that he may not be able to contact him any further than this point, instructs him to check the heads in the back employee room for anything strange, and all while being surrounded by the animatronics and their methods of making themselves evident. Foxy banging on the door, Chica and Bonnie's raspy breathing, and Freddy's calliope music in the background. The last sound being heard was the growl of Fredbear, now deemed Golden Freddy, before hearing static on the phone line. It's believed by Mike that the man on the phone was killed by the animatronics that stalked him, and if that were the case, he certainly did too precise of a job predicting his own fate at the beginning of the week with his departure from the company. He was also known for pre-recording his messages, since we learned that Jeremy Fitzgerald was welcomed to his new summer job at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, yet his paycheck was drawn in November. However, this was all pre-planned in a frantic attempt to remove himself away from the company, giving Mike the impression that his death was recorded on tape. Made sure it was recorded on tape, and this time spelling it out for him blatantly by stating, "Good thing I record these messages beforehand." And all happened right before he was supposedly killed. The killer's main intention was that he wanted to be completely out of the picture in a way that the only way out was to make the untimely end very evident. Since his voice messages were all pre-recorded, it could also be safe to deduce that all of the other animatronics and their noises were also pre-recorded to make it sound like he was about to be killed, and giving the impression to Mike Schmidt that he was in fact killed, when in reality, he wanted to be out of the picture, but he also wanted to be alive. So he wanted everybody at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza to know that he had been killed, thus removing him completely out of the picture, and that he can live on, hopefully to ditch the nightmare once and for all. And how do we know that perhaps the phone guy faked his own death? Well, from what we can understand on the phone, that he was killed by all of the animatronics and possibly being stuffed inside one of the animatronic suits. The one that actually made the attack? Golden Freddy. Which animatronic suit would he be stuffed into? An extra Freddy Fazbear suit, perhaps? He wasn't. Because on night 5, he still made the call. But yet, all we can hear is Golden Freddy's garbled speech on the other end. But did Golden Freddy make the call? My answer? No. How in the world can an animatronic place a phone call? It's obvious the killer made the call as Golden Freddy. And since he knew more about the animatronics than anybody else, he also happened to have an original recording of when Golden Freddy makes his garbled speech, and was able to play that down onto the phone for Mike Schmidt to hear. And wanted to make sure that Mike Schmidt heard it, so he rang him up on the phone, as we would any normal voice message, and ensured Mike Schmidt knew the killer was dead. But was he really dead? You and I know now that this really wasn't the case. The killer still lives on. However, the killer does have a long way to go before he does find an untimely end, but not before firing Mike after a 7th night for the same reason he fired Fritz Smith, tampering with the animatronics and odor. This tells us that the killer is still alive, still does the hiring and firing, and just fired Mike for the same reasons he fired Fritz. It seems that anyone that tried to tamper with the animatronics would also come away with that same foul odor of the murdered children's decomposure along with them. With Freddy Fazbear's Pizza unable to keep employees and the animatronics unable to keep their control, the restaurant closed down for good, enabling the killer to destroy the only artifacts that kept resurfacing from location to location, the animatronic bodies, as one by one they were dismantled at the very location that had all the killings had started, location number 1, at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. The killer felt that by destroying the animatronics here, nobody would come around to look for them, and they would no longer torment him. But he didn't realize that by doing so, he would release the souls from within the suits in hopes to be left alone from the torture. And seeing that this plan had backfired, the souls of the children now roaming free and cornered him in the one room where it all started, the first location's safe room. In order to get away from the souls, he jumps inside Spring Bonnie in his haste to escape, but failed to realize that the spring locks disengaged, killing him instantly and turning him into Springtrap. Now I know what you're thinking. If Purple Guy used the Spring Bonnie suit so much, knew everything about how it worked, wore it carefully to ensure the spring lock mechanisms didn't engage on him, then how come it ended up killing him here? Well, let's not forget that over time this building has gone into a state of disrepair. Purple Guy wanted to make sure this building was his only safe haven away from the vengeful animatronics that were out to get him, and he made sure this place was always standing, hence why we speculated that he could have bought this building. He wanted to make sure the building still stood, and also to ensure no other business would end up here. The Purple Guy should have also taken into account that the buildings require maintenance, and since this whole building's purpose was to serve just as a remote location for him to phone in his instructions to employees, he never factored in maintenance to the building, since it was only used for the purpose of hiding his murder implements, hiding his instructions, and hiding himself. So he wouldn't be bothered to fix any leaks in the roof. Keep in mind that this building had developed a lot of holes. Rainwater collected various areas of the building, and the safe room was no exception. After destroying the animatronic bodies, Purple Guy ended up releasing the souls of the children that he once killed, and they continued to haunt him. They honed in on his location, and in a heated attempt to find sanctuary away from them, he takes refuge in the only hiding place he had at his disposal, the Spring Bonnie suit, which has started to deteriorate due to age, but also now saturated with rainwater from having sitting right under a leak in the roof, something Purple Guy didn't have time to take into consideration, and therefore, the suit he once used as an implement of murder ended up murdering him, and all on the account of neglectful thinking. Purple Guy was frantic, in a rush to get away from being haunted by the souls of the children he murdered, and shortly after his death, noticed how the souls of the children faded away into the air, knowing that the man who caused their demises had just been killed by the same method, from within Spring Bonnie. The crime had come around full circle, and justice had been served. After the killer finally met his real demise, The secret room would serve as a resting place for Springtrap, leaving him to remain imprisoned within it until 30 years later, when the Springtrap suit was included into a new horror-themed attraction called Fazbear's Fright. Right along with the killer's earliest recordings used to train new employees for a brand new restaurant to serve in place of the old Fredbear's Family Diner. A place where nightmares keep on happening. A place where fantasy and reality come to life. A place fueled on a horrid fantasy and the reality of events perpetrated by an unknown phone guy we referred to as the killer himself, Purple Guy. A place deemed as the epitome of a brand new nightmare unfolding, Fazbear's Fright. It is here that the killer would have one more shot at being the killer he once was, while offering his victim hallucinations of his own memories, nightmares, apparitions of the very machines that caused him so much grief. History repeats itself for this one artifact that still remained these 30 years, and it is one piece of history that will soon be put to rest, as a faulty wiring system will eventually engulf the attraction, destroying everything along with it, including the only evidence of a killing spree 30 years in the making. And now we know where Springtrap came from, which was the same exact location in the same exact room as was stored the original employee pre-recorded cassettes made by the man who made them famous, the Purple Guy. We also know him as Phone Guy. The killer in the Freddy Fazbear's franchise has now been laid to rest. Within a pile of burned remains of a final attempt to keep the Freddy Fazbear legacy going, Springtrap and the recorded messages of a killer at large are finally put to rest. The full tale now told, its mysteries unfold, and the rest is merely history.